The crystal glasses stopped clinking as Lila stood up, raising her hand like a judge. "The family voted," she announced, "and the result is, you're out." Applause broke out. Mom stared at her plate. I just smiled, placing a red file on the table. "Good," I said, "because you probably won't need this." 10 seconds later, the room understood I had 18 months of evidence on them. My name is Erica Chapman. I am 34 years old, and I am a forensic accountant. I founded Argent Bridge Analytics precisely because I believe in one immutable truth. Numbers do not lie, people lie, families lie, but the math always, eventually, tells the story. This was the story I was sitting in, the classic Boulder, Colorado Thanksgiving, the house, a sprawling, vaulted-ceiling monument to my father's 70s-era success, smelled of pine, roasting turkey, and the faint, acidic tang of resentment. 12 of us were seated around the heavy oak table. Candles flickered, casting long shadows that danced on the log walls, making the forced smiles look even more grotesque. The silverware was polished, the crystal was gleaming, but the air was cold, thin, and brittle, holding a tension so sharp you could cut yourself on it. I had known, of course, that this dinner was a trap. The preceding weeks had been a masterclass in passive aggression. The excluded group texts, the hushed phone calls that ended the moment I entered a room. They had summoned me here not for forgiveness or reconciliation, but for a public execution. My sister, Lila, sat opposite me. She was 30, wrapped in a cloud of creamy white cashmere that probably cost more than my first car. She looked angelic, fragile, and utterly convinced of her own righteousness. Beside her, vibrating with a smug, predatory energy, was her fiancé, Mason Ward. Mason was a man whose smile never reached his eyes. He was a local real estate developer, which in Boulder meant he bought historic properties and gutted them for luxury condos. His hand rested proprietorially on Lila's back, his watch catching the candlelight. The hook had already been delivered. The ambush was complete. Lila had stood, silencing the room, and delivered her verdict. "The family voted," she had said, her voice ringing with the clarity of a martyr. "And the result is, you're out." Aunt Karen, who I had bailed out of a significant gambling debt 2 years prior, had actually clapped. A short, sharp burst of applause. My father, Richard Chapman, merely leaned back in his chair, a silent abdication of responsibility. He would not intervene. He never did. My mother, Eleanor, simply crumpled, her gaze dropping to the damask tablecloth, a single tear tracing a line through her foundation. And I, Erica Chapman, had smiled. It was not the smile they wanted. They wanted hysterics. They wanted me to beg. They wanted a scene that would validate their narrative of me as the unstable, difficult, jealous older sister. Instead, they got the accountant. I had placed the red file on the table. It was not a prop. It was the culmination of 18 months of quiet, methodical data collection. "Good," I said, my voice perfectly even, cutting through the stunned silence. "Because it seems you won't need this anymore." The red file sat between the gravy boat and the untouched cranberry sauce. It was thick. It was organized. It was, professionally speaking, my masterpiece. Mason was the first to speak, his manufactured charm slipping. "What is this, Erica? More of your drama? You're ruining Thanksgiving." "I'm not Mason," I said, gently untying the ribbon on the file. "I'm just presenting my findings." I slid the top document toward the center of the table. "Let's begin with Section 1. We'll call this, the sale of Nora's Meadow." A sharp intake of breath from Mom. Nora's Meadow was my grandmother's land. 300 acres of pristine wilderness bordering the national forest. It was supposed to be our legacy. "This," I said, tapping the paper, "is a sales contract dated 4 months ago. It conveys the entire parcel to a limited liability company called Boulder Peaks Development." I looked at my father. An LLC registered in Delaware 3 days before the sale. You sold it. My father found his voice, a low growl. That's family business. That's our liquidity. Is it? I slid the next page over. Because you sold it for $50,000. The room went absolutely silent. Even the clappers looked confused. 50,000, I repeated, letting the number hang in the air. For 300 acres of prime boulder foothills, which is fascinating, considering the county appraisal just last year valued the land, even with conservation easements, at $2.5 million. Lila finally spoke, her voice high and defensive. It needed work. It was a burden. Mason is helping us manage the asset. Is he? I smiled, turning to the next tab in the file. That brings me to Section 2, the addendum. I pushed the single-page document toward Lila. This addendum, executed the same day, promises a 15% profit share of all future development on the rezoned land to one Mason ward. Lila blinked, grabbing the paper. That's his fee. He's a professional. His fee for what? Exactly, Lila. Because I also have here, I pulled another document. The rezoning application Mason filed with the county before the sale, using the Shell Corporation. He wasn't managing an asset. He was buying it from a distressed seller, our family, for pennies on the dollar, using a forged appraisal, all to build luxury condos. He wasn't helping the family. He was gutting it. Mason stood up, his chair scraping violently. This is slander. You are insane. Am I? I asked calmly. Or am I just the only one who checks the paperwork? That brings me to Section 3, the forgery. This document was heavier. I placed it in front of my father. This is a power of attorney. It grants Mason full authority to act on behalf of Mom and Dad in all real estate transactions. It's dated 6 months ago. My father stared at it. We signed that. We had to, for the new ventures. No, Dad, I said softly. You signed a power of attorney in 2012, when you had your heart surgery. I remember. I was the one who filed it with your lawyer. This one. I tapped the paper. Has your signatures, but the notary stamp? Maria Sanchez? The notary ID number is invalid. The Secretary of State has no record of her. The stamp is a fake. I looked at Mason. You forged a power of attorney using scans of their signatures, didn't you? You used it to authorize the $50,000 sale to your own shell company. The blood drained from Mason's face. Lila looked from him to me, her angelic mask cracking, revealing the confused, terrified child beneath. He wouldn't, she whispered. He wouldn't. Wouldn't he? I reached into my purse and pulled out a small, digital voice recorder. Accountants don't like voice recordings. They're messy. They're emotional. But sometimes they are necessary. I pressed play. The room filled with Mason's voice, smooth and reassuring. Just read the script. Eleanor, it's a formality for the bank. My mother's voice, hesitant, frail. Mason, I don't understand this legal language. It sounds like I'm selling the meadow. A sigh. Mason's voice, colder now. You don't need to understand it. You just need to read it. Do you want Lila to be happy or not? Do you want your husband to find out about the credit cards? Just read the words. Eleanor. There was a sniffle, the sound of paper rustling, and then my mother's broken voice, reading the script that gave him permission. I pressed stop. I could have kept going. I had the rest, the part where he coached her, the part where he threatened her, but I stopped. I stopped to spare my mother the full depth of her own humiliation. She was sobbing openly now, her face buried in her napkin. I looked around the table, at my father, who looked gray, suddenly 20 years older, at Lila, who was staring at Mason with a look of pure, unadulterated horror, at Mason, who was frozen, his mask of charm completely gone, revealing the petty, terrified fraud beneath. I stood up, placing the recorder back in my bag. I gathered the papers, neatly stacking them, and slid them back into the red file. I tied the ribbon. From here, I said, my voice echoing in the devastating silence. This becomes a legal matter. My attorney has copies of everything, including the bank drafts tracing the $50,000 from your Shell account. Mason, back into your personal account, minus the $5,000 you kicked back to Dad to keep him quiet. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The smell of the cooling turkey was nauseating. Then, a new sound, a click. I turned. My cousin, the one who clapped, was holding up his phone. The small red light was on. He was recording me. I looked directly into his camera. I gave him a small, tight nod. Let him record. Let them all see. The family had voted, and I, Erica Chapman, had just tabled the motion. That red file wasn't an impulse. It was a conclusion. It was the end product of a lifetime spent auditing the people I loved. A habit that began when I was 15 years old. My mother's illness wasn't the kind with casseroles and get-well-soon cards. It was the quiet, suffocating kind. A depression that settled over our house like a layer of dust, turning the bright boulder sunlight gray before it even passed through the windows. She spent the better part of my sophomore year in bed. A ghost in her own home, and my father. A man built for grand gestures and booming laughter. Simply did not know how to exist in the silence. He was a dreamer, an architect of grand, unfunded ideas, and he retreated into them, leaving the mechanics of our life to rust. The mail piled up on the antique sideboard, bills, then late notices, then letters stamped in urgent, angry red. I was the one who finally opened them. I was 15, learning algebra by day and triage by night. Do we pay the electric bill or the water bill? Can the mortgage wait one more week? I sat at the heavy oak table, the same one I would one day use as a courtroom. With my father's checkbook and a calculator, I learned the precise, metallic taste of fear. I learned how to stretch a dollar until it screamed. But more than that, I learned the fundamental truth that would come to define my entire existence. Money does not lie. People lie. People say, everything is fine, when the foreclosure notice is sitting right on the kitchen counter. People say, we'll handle it, when they have no plan. People promise to pay you back when they have no intention of doing so. But the numbers? The numbers were pure. The balance sheet, the profit and loss, the cold, hard math of a negative account balance. That was the only truth. It was a terrible, unforgiving truth, but it was not a lie. I became fluent in that language. While my friends were worrying about prom dates, I was negotiating with credit card companies, learning the bureaucratic dance of deferments and payment plans. I became an expert at balancing the emotional, volatile ledger of my family against the cold, factual ledger of our debts. When it came time for college, the choice was obvious. Others went into finance to build empires. I went into forensic accounting to find the truth. I wanted to be the person who could walk into a room full of lies and find the single, solitary fact. My company, Argent Bridge Analytics, was the fortress I built on that principle. I hunt for the truth hidden in the spreadsheets, the shell corporations, the phantom invoices. My entire professional life is dedicated to the idea that data is the only objective reality. And for years, I applied that same skill set, for free, to my family. As soon as I had my own income, the requests started. They were always emergencies, always, just this once. My father's brilliant new venture that just needed a little seed money, Lila's car, which had mysteriously crashed again, the property taxes on the Boulder house, which were just unbelievable this year. Erica, I paid the debts. I paid for the maintenance on the house. I paid the taxes. I funded their lives, and in return, I received a profound, echoing silence. The money was always accepted. The thank you was always implied, and therefore, never required. I became the family's infrastructure, unseen, unappreciated, but utterly essential. They resented me for it. I was the walking, talking embodiment of their failures, their lack of planning, their inability to manage their own lives. I was the responsible one, which in their language was a synonym for boring, cold, and unfun. Lila was the creative one, Dad was the visionary, Mom was the heart. I was just the bank. The real shift, the one that led to the red file, didn't happen because of them. I was used to their casual betrayals. It happened because of a friend, my best friend in my mid-20s, a woman I trusted like a sister. We were starting a small consulting business. We needed a line of credit. "It's just a formality, Ari," she said, sliding the papers across the table. "We're partners." I co-signed a $50,000 business loan. 3 months later, she was gone. The business was a shell. The money was in an offshore account, and the bank came for me, the partner, the co-signer. It broke me, not just financially. That was a hole I could dig myself out of, but it broke my trust. I had believed her words. I had ignored the paperwork. I had violated my own first principle. Never again. From that day forward, I documented everything, every financial interaction, every contract, every loan, every promise. It was a defense mechanism, a habit born of scar tissue. And I applied it, finally, to my family. I continued to help them. I couldn't stop. They were my blood. But when Lila called, crying about a new utility bill she couldn't pay, I would wire the money, and I would save the text message. "You are a lifesaver, Ari. I swear I'll pay you back next Friday when I get paid." Friday would come and go. The money never would. But the text remained. When Dad asked for $10,000 for a guaranteed stock tip, I made him sign a personal loan document, just a formality. I told him. He laughed and signed it. I notarized it and filed it. For years, I operated under a deeply flawed, childish belief. If I sacrifice enough, they will love me. If I am the hero, if I am the rescuer, if I keep solving their problems, one day they will finally turn around and see my value. They will finally be grateful. It was the single stupidest assumption of my life. The truth, the one I had been avoiding, was so much harsher. If I keep saving them, they will never stand up. My help was just enabling. My sacrifice was just fuel for their dysfunction. They didn't want a savior. They wanted a scapegoat. They didn't want my help. They wanted my resources, and they hated me for having them. The final straw came exactly 1 year before this Thanksgiving. Mason Ward had just entered the picture. I watched him at dinner, his polished veneer, the way his eyes scanned the room, cataloging the assets. He didn't see a family. He saw a mark. I heard him in the kitchen with my father, talking about unlocking the potential of Nora's meadow. That night, I went home and I didn't just review my files. I started an investigation. I began to actively gather, not just passively receive. I set up legal, one-party consent call recording for every interaction. I cross-referenced their tax filings with my own. I pulled the property records for the Boulder house and for Nora's meadow. I saved every email, every text message, every broken promise. I created a secure, encrypted, triple-backed-up digital folder. I was no longer a daughter. I was an auditor. Every lie, every manipulation, every time they told me I was cold and obsessed with money, while their other hand was out, asking for more, it all went into the file. It was a year of meticulous, dispassionate data collection. This wasn't revenge, not then. It was armor. It was the defense I never had when my friend betrayed me. It was the proof I never had when I was 15, trying to explain to my father that his dreams were costing us our home. The red file I placed on that Thanksgiving table was not a fit of pique. It was a balance sheet. It was a final audit. It was 18 months of evidence, a lifetime of grievances, all collated, indexed, and ready for presentation. They had voted me out. They just didn't realize I owned the building. It was a stifling evening in mid-August, the kind where the Colorado air, usually so crisp, felt heavy and stagnant. The attack didn't come as a surprise. It came as a scheduled appointment. Lila had texted me 3 days prior. "We have a wonderful opportunity to discuss. The whole family. Your place? 7 p.m.? My apartment is my sanctuary. Unlike the dark, heavy wood and emotional clutter of the family home in Boulder, My downtown condo is all glass, steel, and white quartz. It is a space of order, logic, and clean lines. I chose it specifically because it is the antithesis of my childhood. It is a place where math makes sense. They arrived precisely at 7, not as a family dropping in, but as a delegation. Lila and Mason, of course. Mason carrying a sleek leather briefcase that screamed, "New money," but they brought reinforcements. My mother and father, they weren't there as parents, they were there as leverage. Silent jurors meant to apply the pressure of unspoken obligation. I offered tea. It was a sterile, professional gesture. I am an accountant. After all, this was a meeting. They settled on my low-profile sofa, a piece of furniture I had chosen for its discomfort. I didn't want guests to linger. My parents took the 2 matching armchairs, flanking the scene, creating a closed circle. "Thank you for seeing us. Erica," Mason began, flashing that high-wattage, low-warmth smile. He was a born salesman, all posture and confidence. He unzipped his briefcase and pulled out a wafer-thin laptop. "We are on the verge of something truly transformative for this family, and we are so excited to finally bring you in." He clicked a button, and the television I used for financial modeling flickered to life. The first slide was a cheap, gradient blue background with cheesy script. "Nora's Nest," the title read, "a Chapman family resort." I kept my face perfectly neutral. I poured myself a cup of tea. "Nora's Nest," Mason continued, pacing in front of my window, the city lights backlighting him like a stage performer, "is more than a project. It is a dream. It is a way to finally truly honor your grandmother's legacy." Lila, picking up her cue, leaned forward, her hands clasped. She was wearing a soft pink sweater, her vulnerable outfit. "It's not just a resort, Erica. It's our future, a shared dream, something for us, for our children, a legacy for the next generation, a place where the Chapmans can always come together." The buzzwords were thick in the air. Legacy, generation, together, dream. These were the words they used when they wanted money. Mason clicked to the next slide. It was a crude architectural rendering, the kind you buy online for $50, of a massive glassy structure superimposed over a photo of Nora's meadow. It looked like a corporate retreat center had crash-landed in the wilderness. "We envision a high-end, eco-luxury experience," Mason said, his voice dropping into a confidential, excited whisper. "Boutique cabins, a farm-to-table restaurant, a spa, corporate retreat packages. The market in Boulder for this is absolutely untapped." I took a sip of tea. It was scalding. "The land is zoned for conservation. Mason, not commercial development. The county will never approve it." Mason chuckled, a patronizing sound. "That's the beauty of it, Erica. We've already had preliminary discussions. The county is amenable to a family use rezoning, provided it generates significant local tax revenue, which it will. This is a guaranteed win." I stared at him. Amenable. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie, because my investigation had already shown me the zoning board's repeated public refusals for any development on that land. But I let him continue. I was gathering data. So," he said, finally sitting down, leaning across my glass coffee table. "We come to the logistics. To unlock this dream, we need the bank to see that the family is 100% committed, united." He slid a thick leather-bound folder across the table. It landed with a soft, expensive thud. "The bank has approved the initial $5 million capital loan," he said. "Contingent on full family buy-in. It's just a formality." I didn't open the folder. I knew exactly what was inside. "What kind of formalities, Mason?" "Just a personal guarantee," he said, waving his hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. "They just need to see all the beneficiaries of Nora's legacy are on board. They need your signature." There it was, the ask. They weren't just gutting the family's main asset. They wanted me to pledge my own assets as collateral for their fantasy. They wanted me to sign a document that would make me personally liable for their $5 million fraud when it inevitably collapsed. My company, my home, my savings, all of it would be on the line. I looked at Lila. I looked at my parents. My father was studying the pattern on my rug. My mother was smiling, a tight, nervous expression. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed like a brick. Mason blinked, his smile faltering. "No, what?" "Erica, I haven't even finished." "You've finished," I said. I set my teacup down. "I'm not signing a personal guarantee. Not for this. Not for anything." I turned my full attention to him, and the auditor took over. Before I would even consider guaranteeing a loan for a used car, let alone $5 million, I would need to see the paperwork, all of it. Mason's face tightened. "The paperwork is all in the folder, Erica." "I doubt it," I said. "I would need the comprehensive business plan. I'd need the third-party feasibility study. I'd need the environmental impact report. And the formal, written pre-approval from the Boulder County Zoning Commission. I would need the cost-benefit analysis, the profit and loss projections for the first 36 months, and the complete cash flow analysis for the first 5 years. I would also need a copy of the appraisal you used to secure these loan terms, and a list of the investors you've already approached." The room was silent. Mason stared at me, his mask of charm completely gone. "Erica," he finally said, his voice laced with contempt, "you're killing the dream with details." "No," I replied, my voice as cold and hard as the quartz countertop behind me. "You're killing the family with a fantasy. You're not building a resort. You're building a bankruptcy. You haven't done any of that work, have you?" I knew he hadn't. The red file on my hard drive proved it. This was the cue, the pivot. When logic failed, the emotional artillery was brought in, right on schedule. Lila's eyes welled up. The first tear traced a perfect, glistening path down her cheek. "I don't understand you," she whispered, her voice cracking with manufactured pain. "Why do you always have to do this? Why do you have to be so negative, so selfish?" The words got louder, the accusation building. "This isn't for Mason. This is for us. This is for Mom and Dad. This is our one chance to finally be secure, to have something of our own. And you're destroying it because you can't stand to see the rest of us happy. You just can't stand not being in control." She was fully crying now, a dramatic, body-shaking sob. It was a masterful performance. I had seen it my entire life. It was the Lila gets her way routine. I looked at my parents. They were the audience. My mother had her hand over her mouth, her eyes pleading with me. "Just sign it, Erica. Stop the crying. Make it stop." My father was still staring at the rug, his jaw set. He was complicit in his silence. He was waiting for me to be the responsible one, to be the adult, to clean up the mess, to take on the risk, just as I had when I was 15. This was the moment, the pivot point. The old me would have caved. The old me, desperate for their approval, for a scrap of love, would have sighed, picked up the pen, and signed her own death warrant. But the old me was gone. The auditor, the analyst, the survivor. She was the one in charge now. I stood up. I walked calmly to the kitchen counter, picked up the hot teapot, and returned to my chair. I refilled my cup. The only sound in the room was the stream of hot water hitting the ceramic and Lila's performative, gulping sobs. I placed the teapot down. I looked at all 4 of them, my gaze moving from my mother's anxious face to my father's stubborn silence, to Mason's barely concealed rage, and finally, to my sister. "I am not signing," I said. My voice was quiet, final. "The discussion is over. Have a safe trip home." Lila's tears stopped. Instantly, it was as if a faucet had been turned off. Her face, which had been a mask of tragic grief, hardened into a cold reptilian fury. "You will regret this," she hissed. "No," I said. "I won't." Mason stood up, violently snatching his laptop and shoving it into his briefcase. He grabbed the leather folder off my table. He didn't say a word. He just walked to the door and pulled it open, not bothering to wait for the others. Lila stood, her face pale with rage. My mother hurried after her, casting one last, terrified look back at me. "Erica, please!" My father was the last to leave. He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. He finally looked at me. His eyes were not sad. They were cold. "You were always a difficult child, Erica," he said. Then he closed the door, leaving me alone in the sterile silence of my apartment. I stood there for a long time. The scent of Lila's expensive perfume lingered in the air, a cloying, sweet smell of manipulation. I finished my tea. Then I went to my home office. I sat at my desk and opened the secure, encrypted file on my server, the one that would, in 3 months, become the red binder. I created a new subfolder. I typed in the entry, August 10th, 7:15 p.m., Project Nora's Nest. I wrote a meticulous summary of the meeting, the attendees, the pitch, the fraudulent claims of county approval, the $5 million loan. I noted, Ward L. requested personal guarantee for commercial loan, failed to provide any financial documentation, feasibility studies, or projections, request denied. I attached the audio file. The high-end microphone in my ceiling-mounted smoke detector had captured every word, every lie, every false promise, every sob. I saved the file and closed the program. I sat back in my chair, staring at the dark screen. I knew, with the chilling certainty of a balance sheet, what would happen next. Phase 1, the attempt to secure my complicity, had failed. Phase 2 was about to begin. They couldn't get my signature, so now they would have to destroy my credibility. The smear campaign was coming. They had just declared war. It began. As I expected, not with a bang, but with a digital whisper. Exactly 1 week after the disastrous meeting in my apartment, my phone buzzed on my nightstand. It was 7 a.m. A notification. You have been removed from the Chapman clan group chat. I stared at the message. It was so juvenile, so deeply Lila. This was her weapon. Exclusion. For years, she had wielded it, orchestrating family holidays I wasn't told about until the last minute, making inside jokes I wasn't privy to. This was the digital equivalent of slamming a bedroom door. It was a petty, symbolic shunning, meant to isolate me, to cut me off from the central nervous system of the family's gossip. It was the first volley, meant to unmoor me. I simply took a screenshot, saved it to a new subfolder titled Harassment, and went to get coffee. The real attack, the professional one, landed 3 days later. The digital shunning was Lila's predictable move. The smear campaign was Mason's, and it had the cold, sophisticated malice of Everett Cole. I first sensed it not online, but in the air. Boulder is a city that desperately wants to be a small town. Reputations are built on a fragile scaffolding of yoga memberships, farmers market sightings, and nonprofit board seats. I walked into my usual coffee shop, and the atmosphere shifted. The barista, who usually had my order ready, fumbled with the cup, suddenly unable to meet my eyes. A woman I knew peripherally from the Boulder Community Foundation, a woman who had pitched me for a large donation just last month, was waiting in line behind me. I felt her take a half step back, her hand instinctively moving to the strap of her purse. It was a subtle shift, a change in barometric pressure. I was no longer a respected local business owner. I was contaminated. I was dangerous. I found out why an hour later. My office administrator, Sarah, a woman whose efficiency I valued precisely because she was devoid of drama, called me at my desk. Her voice was uncharacteristically tight. "Erica," she said, "I think you need to come out here." I walked to her desk. She had a website open on her monitor. It was not a major news outlet. It was one of those anonymous, pop-up, community watchdog blogs, the kind that pretends to be journalism but is really just a vessel for poison. This one was called the Boulder Community Voice. The headline was plastered across the top, above a grainy, unflattering photo of me taken at a charity gala 3 years ago. Local financial advisor betrays Boulder's most vulnerable. My blood didn't run cold. It didn't boil. It simply slowed down, my focus narrowing to a pinpoint. I read the article. It was a masterpiece of innuendo and outright fabrication. It alleged that a prominent Boulder-based financial analyst, Erica Chapman of Argent Bridge Analytics, was under investigation for gross mismanagement and suspected embezzlement from a local elderly care fund. It was brilliant in its vagueness. It didn't name a specific fund, which would have been legally actionable. It just used phrases like a local initiative for seniors and funds intended for the care of our parents and grandparents. It was a public execution. They weren't accusing me of fighting with my family. They were accusing me of stealing from the elderly. In a town like Boulder, that was a death sentence. And they had proof. The article included embedded images, screenshots of what purported to be a bank statement from the Boulder Senior Trust, a fictitious entity, showing a transfer of over $100,000 to an offshore account. It included a fabricated ledger, with my name and digital signature authorizing the transaction. I leaned in, my analyst's brain taking over. The forgery was good, very good. The bank statement template was a near-perfect match for a local credit union. Though they'd used a logo that was 2 years out of date, the ledger was crafted to look like my company's software. They had blurred the routing numbers, redacted key fields. To a layperson, it looked absolutely, devastatingly real. This was not Mason. Mason was a brute force liar. This was sophisticated. This was professional. They had hired someone. Get me the domain registration data for this site, please, I said to Sarah, my voice perfectly calm. And a full, time-stamped PDF of the entire page, including the source code. Erica, should I call someone? She whispered, her eyes wide with alarm. I am calling someone, I said. I walked back into my office and closed the door. I didn't engage. I didn't post a frantic denial on social media. I didn't call my mother and scream. That was the trap. They wanted me to be hysterical. They wanted me to look guilty. I sat at my desk, and I made one call. Delia Hart is not a Boulder lawyer. She is a New York lawyer who happens to live in Boulder. She is a small, impeccably dressed woman with a mind like a steel trap. She is a former federal prosecutor who specialized in white-collar crime and now handles high-stakes corporate litigation and defamation. She does not do mediation. She does not find common ground. She dismantles. Delia, I said when she picked up, it's Erica. I have a new file for you. Go, she said. Defamation, forgery, and conspiracy. I'm sending you a link to a blog post. It's a professional hit job. I need a full trace and a cease and desist. But I also want to find the source. This is tied to the Nora's Meadow case we discussed. Send it, she said, and hung up. I forwarded her the email with the link, the PDF, and the domain trace I just received from Sarah. The site was registered 2 days ago. The host was in Panama. The owner was hidden behind a proxy service. Delia and I worked in parallel. She began the legal assault, while I did what I do best. I followed the data. They had hidden the domain, but they were sloppy about the content. The images, the proof, weren't hosted on the blog's server. They were embedded from a third-party media company. I found it in the source code, a single line of text. The company was called Pixelflow Media. I had never heard of it. I ran a search. They were a reputation management firm based in Denver, a digital laundromat. Their website was full of sanitized corporate speak, online narrative control, search engine optimization, proactive brand strategy. It was a chop shop for character assassination. This was the first thread. A firm like this doesn't work for free. Their business filings were public. The firm was owned by a shell corporation. The shell corporation had a registered agent. That agent was a PR firm, a mid-sized, aggressive Denver firm. I ran the firm's name through my own client database and public records, and there it was. Mason Ward had used this exact PR firm 2 years ago to promote his failed Canyon Point luxury condo project. The chain was complete. Mason, furious after I refused to fund his fraud, hired his old PR firm. The PR firm, wanting to keep their hands clean, subcontracted the dirtiest work, the actual forgery and the anonymous blog, to Pixel Flow Media. It was clean, it was simple, but it also felt too small. Mason was an idiot. He was motivated by greed and ego. But this attack felt different. It felt personal. It felt like it was designed specifically to counter me. Delia found the other half of the story. While I was tracing the smear, she was tracing the money. She called me that evening. "Erica," she said, her voice flat. "The Nora's Nest project. The $5 million loan you told me about." "What about it?" "It wasn't a bank loan," she said. "The capital wasn't coming from a traditional lender. It was private equity. Mason's Shell Corporation. Boulder Peaks Development. Has one capital investor. A single LLC registered in Nevada." A pit formed in my stomach. "What's the name of the LLC?" "Silverado Holdings," Delia said. "And I ran the proprietor. The name is Everett Cole." The room went silent. I felt the air leave my lungs, as if I'd been punched. I hadn't heard that name in 10 years, not since my senior year of college. Everett Cole. He had been the star, the golden boy, the senior who ran the university's investment fund. I was the 19-year-old intern, the eager-to-please analyst. He had been my mentor. He was charismatic, brilliant, and utterly sociopathic. He had me help him with a new financial model, using my math skills, my analytical mind, to build the scaffolding for a Ponzi scheme. He used my work to defraud the university's alumni fund of $3 million. I was the one who found it. I was the one who found the discrepancy, the phantom trade, the impossible returns. I was young and stupid, and I believed in the numbers. I reported him. The resulting investigation nearly cost me my degree. He was expelled, charged, and took a plea deal that landed him in a low-security prison for 18 months. He had ruined my first real-world experience, shattered my trust, and taught me the hard way that the most dangerous criminals wore the best suits. And he was back. This wasn't Mason's project. It was Everett's. Mason was just the local face, the greedy, malleable puppet. Everett was the money, and he was the strategist. He knew I was the only person in my family who would check the numbers. He knew I would be the one to find the fraud. The smear campaign wasn't just revenge for me denying the loan. It was a preemptive strike, orchestrated by Everett, to destroy my credibility before I could destroy his deal. He was trying to neutralize me. "Delia," I said, my voice shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, crystalline rage. "This changes everything. This isn't a family dispute. This is a conspiracy." "I know," she said, "and I have it." "Have what?" "The PR firm in Denver. They're not willing to go to jail for Mason Ward. They just sent me the entire email chain. They're rolling over on him to avoid a fraud charge." She emailed me the file. I opened it. The first message was from Mason to an encrypted, anonymous email address. Subject: The sister problem. Body: The in-person approach failed. She's not signing. She's the only thing standing between us and the rezoning. She's an accountant. She's going to dig. We need to neutralize her. The reply came from Everett. Then neutralize her. You have the budget. I want her reputation destroyed before the first project bids go public. Make her toxic. I don't care how. Just get it done. And the final, damning email, from Mason to the account manager at the PR firm. Per our discussion. Target: Erica Chapman. Narrative: Financial elder abuse. Execute. I printed the emails. I stared at the words. Execute. This was the man my sister was going to marry. This was the man my parents had sided with. They had aligned themselves with a petty fraud who was being bankrolled by a sociopath, and they had aimed all of it at me. Delia didn't wait for my instruction. She sent the entire package: the forged bank statements, the emails from Mason, the the proof of conspiracy between him and Everett Cole, to the lawyers for Pixel Flow Media and the Denver PR firm. Her demand was not a request. It was an order. A lawsuit would be filed in federal court in 1 hour. Naming them as co-conspirators in a multi-million-dollar fraud and defamation case. She offered them one path to mitigation. The blog post was to be erased from the internet. All cached copies, all social media mentions, gone. A full public, front-page retraction and apology was to be issued immediately, and they were to turn over, in full, every piece of communication they had ever had with Mason Ward or Everett Cole. It took less than 48 hours. The blog post vanished. The Boulder Community Voice homepage was replaced with a single, watery statement. We have recently discovered significant inaccuracies. We retract all claims. We deeply apologize to Ms. Erica Chapman. It was a win, a clean surgical victory. The immediate threat to my reputation was gone. But as I stood in my office, looking at the screen, I felt no peace. I felt no relief. They had tried to destroy me. They had used my family to do it. The blog was gone, but the war had just begun. My anger was a quiet, cold engine that was just starting to warm up. They had attacked my name. I was going to take their money, their land, and their entire, rotten dream. The retraction from the Boulder Community Voice was a legal victory, but it was not a social one. The apology was watery, buried in legalese. In a town like Boulder, a retraction doesn't erase the original stain. It just paints a thin, unconvincing layer over it. The whispers didn't stop. They just became more discreet. The woman at the coffee shop still flinched. I was still toxic. Mason and Everett had attacked my professional reputation, using a fake charity as their weapon. They had painted me as an embezzler. My rage from that discovery, the cold, crystalline anger, had now settled. It was no longer a fire. It was a lens. It was a perfectly ground piece of glass that brought the world into sharp, unforgiving focus. They had used a charity to attack me, I decided, then, to look at the charities they were involved in. My anger had been a fog. This new emptiness, this cold clarity, was a tool. Mason Ward, in his quest to be seen as a Boulder man about town, had plastered his community involvement all over his now-defunct PR firm's website. He was the honorary treasurer of the Boulder Foothills Reforestation Fund. It was a small, well-respected local nonprofit dedicated to restoring wildfire-damaged areas. It was the perfect cover, environmental, local, and just obscure enough that no one was paying close attention. I was a member of the Boulder Community Foundation, the larger umbrella organization that helped fund many of these smaller nonprofits. I had access to their public-facing documents. I started there. I spent a Saturday in my office, not as a victim, but as an analyst. I pulled the Reforestation Fund's Form 990s for the past 3 years. These are the tax documents nonprofits must file, and they are public. On the surface, they were clean. Revenue looked normal. Expenses were categorized in broad, unhelpful strokes. Program services, administrative, fundraising, the numbers balanced. But a 990 is a summary. It's a press release. It's not the truth. The truth, as always, is in the raw data. It's in the general ledger. I knew the director of the fund, Agnes White. She was a dedicated, earnest woman in her 60s who genuinely loved trees. She was not a numbers person. She was a heart person, which made her the perfect mark for a man like Mason. I called her. I didn't accuse. I requested. Agnes, I said, it's Erica Chapman. I know you're aware of the recent unpleasantness with Mr. Ward's associates. Erica, dear, it was just awful, she said, her voice warm and sympathetic. I never believed a word of it. I appreciate that, I said, which is why I'm calling you on a professional matter. My firm, Argent Bridge, is offering to conduct a pro bono internal audit for the fund. There was a pause. An audit? But we just had our review. Everything was fine. I'm not talking about a review. Agnes, I'm talking about a deep dive analysis. As the fund's treasurer, Mason has signature authority, given the recent revelations about his business partners. I have professional concerns about the fund's financial health. I am offering this service free of charge, as a concerned member of this community. I let the implication hang in the air. Given the revelations, I had just sent her the retraction notice, and more importantly, the leaked email chain where Mason had ordered my execution. There was a long silence. "Oh," she said. It was a small, frightened sound. "Oh, dear, yes, I see. When can you start?" The next day, a Sunday, I was sitting in the fund's tiny, cramped back office, a box of disorganized receipts to my left, and a laptop with read-only access to their QuickBooks to my right. Agnes had given me the key, her hands trembling slightly. "Please," she had whispered, "be discreet." It took me less than 2 hours. It wasn't a single, spectacular act of theft. It was a slow, steady bleed. It was a symphony of petty fraud, conducted by a man who believed he was smarter than everyone in the room. He had been embezzling, but he was too arrogant to cover his tracks properly. He was a real estate developer, not an accountant. He left breadcrumbs. First, I found the reimbursements, dozens of them, all signed off by Mason himself. As treasurer, he had bought a new laptop, a $5,000 video conferencing system, high-end luggage, all filed under administrative expenses. Then I found the consulting fees, monthly payments of $2,000 to an LLC I didn't recognize. Foothills Strategic Planning, it was called. I ran the corporate registration while I sat there. The LLC was registered 3 months prior. The sole proprietor was Mason Ward. The address was his personal post office box. He was paying himself a consulting fee out of the charity's operating budget. But the final piece, the one that made my hands stop moving on the keyboard, was an invoice dated 3 weeks ago. It was for $7,500. The vendor, Pixel Flow Media. He had paid for the smear campaign against me with the charity's money. He had used a fund dedicated to planting trees to pay a digital chop shop to forge bank statements and accuse me of elder abuse. I very calmly printed the invoice. I traced the check number in the ledger. I cross-referenced it with the scanned bank statement. The check had cleared. I gathered my findings. The Pixel Flow invoice, the statements for his Shell LLC, a list of over $40,000 in fraudulent reimbursements. I put them in a simple, thin, black binder. I made 5 copies. I did not go to the press. I did not post on social media. That was his game. My game was procedure. My game was the boardroom. I called Agnes and told her to convene an emergency meeting of the fund's board of directors for the following evening. I told her to tell them it was a matter of the fund's immediate survival. I told her not to tell Mason. The next night, I walked into the conference room of the Boulder Library. Agnes was there, looking pale. With her were the 3 other board members, a retired dentist, a local councilwoman, and a wealthy tech philanthropist. They looked confused and annoyed. "Thank you for coming," I said. "My name is Erica Chapman. I am a forensic accountant. At the request of your director, I have performed an internal review of your books. I have provided each of you with a summary of my findings." I handed each of them a black binder. I didn't use emotional language. I didn't say theft or fraud. I just presented the numbers. I was an auditor delivering a report. "If you will turn to page 1, I said, my voice quiet and steady, "you will see an invoice from a vendor called Pixel Flow Media. This is a reputation management firm in Denver. The expense was coded to fundraising. I have confirmed this vendor provides no services related to reforestation. They do, however, specialize in online defamation." I let them read it. The councilwoman's eyes widened. "If you will turn to page 2, you will find the incorporation documents for Foothills Strategic Planning, which has been receiving a monthly fee of $2,000. You will note the proprietor is Mr. Ward." The dentist made a small choking sound. "Finally, pages 3 through 10 contain a full accounting of $41,800 in reimbursements, including vehicles, travel, and electronics, all signed by Mr. Ward, for which your office has no corresponding receipts. I finished and stood in silence. The philanthropist was the first to speak, his voice a low growl. "He's stealing from us. That son of a bitch is stealing from us." The councilwoman was already on her phone. "I'm calling the district attorney. We are filing a police report. Tonight." The board voted unanimously to remove Mason as treasurer, effective immediately. They voted to hire Delia Hart to file a civil suit to recover every stolen cent. And they voted, most importantly, to issue a full public statement. This time, the news was not on an anonymous blog. It was on the front page of the Boulder Daily Camera. Local developer removed from charity board amid embezzlement probe. The article detailed the board's findings, their immediate legal action, and it ended with a quote from Agnes White. The director: "We are deeply grateful to Erica Chapman of Argent Bridge Analytics for her pro bono audit and for bringing these staggering discrepancies to our light. She is a true friend to this community." The war was over. I had won. I did not post the article online. I did not send it to my family. I simply had my firm's website publish the new, corrected, fully transparent financial statement for the Reforestation Fund, free of charge. The message was clear. I was the one who cleaned up the mess. I was the one who restored order. The shift in the town was immediate. The barista at my coffee shop refused to take my money. "This one's on the house, Ms. Chapman." The woman from the foundation who had avoided my gaze sent me a gushing, 3-paragraph email apologizing for the terrible rumors and inviting me to be the keynote speaker at their next luncheon. I was no longer toxic. I was a hero. My family, however, was silent. My aunts and cousins, the ones who had clapped at my excommunication, now avoided eye contact when I saw them at the grocery store. They would see me in an aisle, abandon their carts, and walk briskly in the other direction. I was no longer just the difficult one. I was the one who had been proven right. I was the one who held all the cards. I was the one who had brought their golden boy down. My father grew quiet, retreating into a stony, humiliated silence. My mother was the only one who dared to bridge the gap. She showed up at my apartment a week after the article, unannounced. She was holding a Pyrex dish covered in tinfoil, her classic peace offering, chicken and rice casserole. I let her in. The silence in my apartment was heavy, sterile. She placed the casserole on my quartz countertop, her hands fussing with the crimped edges of the foil. "Your father," she said, not looking at me. "He's not taking this very well. Erica." I just stood there, my arms crossed. "Taking what well, Mom? The news that his future son-in-law is a common thief? The news that he steals from a tree fund?" She flinched, her eyes finally snapping to mine. They were filled with a desperate, weary sadness. "You've made your point. You've won. You've humiliated him. You've humiliated your sister. Are you happy now?" I stared at her. After everything, after the lies, the forgery, the smear campaign, the theft, I was still the one responsible for their pain. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt tired, a profound, bone-deep emptiness. "You should go, Mom," I said, my voice flat. She looked at the casserole, then at me. Her face crumpled. She didn't cry. She just nodded, turned, and let herself out. I stood at my window for a long time, watching the lights of the city come on. I had won the battle for my reputation. The community saw the truth. But I knew this was not the end. This was just the second act. The theft from the charity was petty. The smear campaign was personal. But the real prize, the multi-million-dollar fraud centered on Nora's meadow, was still in play. Everett Cole was still out there. They had been exposed. They were wounded. And I knew, with the cold certainty of an auditor, that a wounded, desperate animal is the most dangerous kind. There was one last counterattack coming, and I had to be ready for it. The news of Mason's exposure at the charity landed like a stone in the deep, cold pond of my family's silence. The ripples spread, but they were invisible. No one called me to apologize. No one called me to rage. They simply disappeared. The shunning was no longer a petty group chat removal. It was a total, comprehensive excommunication. My father stopped answering his phone. My mother's text messages, when they came, were brief, functional inquiries about the weather, as if she were texting a distant cousin. They were all in their bunker, waiting for the fallout to settle, still allied with the man I had proven was a thief. My victory felt hollow. My reputation in town was restored, but my family was gone. The anger I had felt, that cold, sharp engine, had burned itself out, leaving only that familiar, profound emptiness. I had won, but I was, once again, completely alone. The call came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 weeks after the newspaper article. I didn't recognize the number, but it was a bolder prefix. I let it go to voicemail. I was in no mood for another awkward conversation with a sympathetic community member. A minute later, a text message came through from the same number. "Erica, it's Jo, your great-aunt, Nora's sister. I am at the old cottage on the meadow. You need to come here, please. It's important." Aunt Jo. I hadn't seen her in at least 3 years. She was the family's ghost. My grandmother's younger sister. She was a quiet, bird-like woman who had never approved of my father's grandiosity. She lived on the fringes, an observer. She was the only one who had never asked me for money. I drove. The familiar road out of Boulder, winding up toward the foothills, felt different. The land was still beautiful, the sky a piercing, unforgiving blue, but I was driving toward the very asset that had torn us apart, Nora's meadow. The main house, the one my parents had lived in and subsequently mortgaged to the brink of extinction, was dark. I drove past it, down the small dirt track to the original one-room cottage my grandmother had lived in when she first bought the land. Jo was sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in a thick wool shawl. Despite the mild day, she looked older than I remembered, her face a road map of fine wrinkles. She was holding a rusted rectangular biscuit tin on her lap. "Erica," she said, her voice thin as paper. She didn't stand. "Aunt Jo, are you all right?" "I am fine." She gestured to the step beside her. "Sit. I've been doing some cleaning, before the vultures came for it." I sat, the old wood groaning under me. The silence of the meadow was overwhelming. No cars, no phones, just the sound of the wind moving through the high pines. "Your grandmother," Jo began, tapping the tin box with a single, gnarled finger. "Nora was not a simple woman. Your father. He inherited her ambition, but none of her sense. You, child. You inherited her ledger." I looked at her, confused. "She knew," Jo said. "She saw everything. She knew what this family was, and she knew who you were, long before any of us." She pushed the tin box off her lap and onto mine. It was heavy. "She gave this to me the month before she passed." She said, "Jo, you hold on to this. Don't put it with the lawyers. They'll muddle it. You wait. You'll know when the time is right. You'll know who to give it to." My hands were trembling slightly as I lifted the lid. It screeched in protest. Inside, there was no jewelry, no precious heirlooms, just a sheaf of old papers, a small, dried columbine flower, and a thick cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with wax. Written on the front in my grandmother's precise, elegant script were 5 words. "For the one who carries most." I broke the seal. My fingers felt clumsy, too large. I unfolded the heavy bond paper. It was a letter, dated a decade ago. "My dearest granddaughter," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and the family is behaving exactly as I predicted. I love them all. You must know that. I love my son, your father, for his big, impractical heart. I love your sister for her fire, but they are people of the air. They are untethered. They build castles on clouds and are shocked when they fall. I have watched you since you were a girl. I watched you at 15, at that big oak table, paying the bills my son ignored. I watched you give up your summers to work, while your sister took lessons. I watched you become the parent, the provider, the anchor. You are the only one of them with her feet on the earth. You are the only one who understands the cost. I am writing this to tell you that I see you. I saw every sacrifice, and I am so sorry that we, as a family, put that weight on you. It was not fair, but you bore it. And because you bore it, you are the only one I trust with my heart. You are the only one I trust with the land. Attached to this letter is a directive for my estate. The lawyers called it a conditional stewardship trust. I call it a failsafe. Your father and mother are the beneficiaries of the land, but I have placed a condition on their control, a failsafe that can only be triggered by you, and only if my worst fears came true. I have left you a key. It is not a key to a house. It is a key to your own freedom, disguised as one last burden. I am sorry for that, but you are the only one strong enough to turn it. My vision was blurring. I was not crying, but the world had contracted to the edges of this piece of paper. I pulled out the second document. It was legal, official, stamped by her attorney. It was a codicil to her will. It stipulated that full, singular, and non-revocable control of the Nora's Meadow property, for a period of 3 years, would be granted to any single heir who could satisfy 2 specific conditions in a court of probate. I read Condition 1. The claimant must demonstrate, through verified financial documentation, that they have personally contributed over 60% of the combined mortgage, tax, and utility payments for the primary Chapman residence for a period of no less than 5 consecutive years prior to the filing. I stopped breathing. It was an audit. From the grave. My grandmother had set an audit trap for her own family. My mind flashed to the binders, the spreadsheets, the wire transfers, the canceled checks, the red file. I hadn't been building a case against my family. I had been building my case as Nora's heir. I read Condition 2. The claimant must provide sworn testimony, corroborated by at least one attending witness, that they have been subjected to a public and intentional act of humiliation or shunning by a minimum of 5 members of the Chapman family, gathered in one place, for reasons pertaining to the family's financial or social disputes. I lowered the paper onto my lap. The Thanksgiving dinner. Lila's announcement. The family voted. The applause. My aunt and cousins, clapping. My father's silence. My mother's tears. The cousin with the camera. It was not an ambush. It was a qualification. My grandmother, in her infinite, brutal wisdom, had known they would one day turn on me, and she had weaponized it. She had turned my greatest pain into my final key. I looked up at Aunt Jo. My voice was a croak. Aunt Jo, you were there. At Thanksgiving. You were in the kitchen. She met my gaze, her old eyes sharp and clear. I heard every word. I heard them clap. I have never been so ashamed in my life. I left. I didn't say goodbye. You heard it, I whispered. You're my witness. I am, she said, placing her small, dry hand on top of mine. Nora knew. She always knew. I didn't pack the tin. I drove directly to Delia Hart's office, the papers on the passenger seat. Delia, who I believed was unshockable, read the letter and the codicil. She read them twice. She then looked up at me, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. It was the first time I had ever seen her smile. Erica Chapman, she said, her voice full of a terrible, newfound respect. Your grandmother was a goddamn strategic genius. This is the most beautiful, vindictive, and legally ironclad piece of estate planning I have ever witnessed. It's a sniper rifle. Is it real, Delia? Can we use it? Real? She laughed. A short, sharp bark. It's a probate directive. It's a ticking time bomb. And your family just lit the fuse. This changes everything. What about the sale to Mason? The $50,000 fraud? Forget the fraud, she said, already pulling up court filings on her monitor. The fraud is a misdemeanor. This is the main event. Your parents' sale to Mason is void, not just because he forged the POA, but because they never had the authority to sell in the first place. She spun the monitor to face me. Nora's will gave them beneficial use. But this codicil placed a conditional lien on their control. That condition, your public humiliation and your financial support, was just met. The moment Lila said you're out, she legally transferred power of the estate to you. Mason wasn't buying land from your parents. He was trying to buy land that, as of that dinner, legally belonged to you. The emptiness I had felt for weeks was gone. It was replaced by a slow, cold-burning sense of purpose. It wasn't anger. It wasn't joy. It was recognition. I finally understood my grandmother. I finally understood myself. Delia filed an emergency motion in probate court. It was not a lawsuit. It was an activation. We stood before a judge a week later. It was a closed hearing. No press. Just me, Delia, Aunt Jo, and a very pale, very terrified lawyer representing my parents. Everett Cole and Mason Ward had not even been invited. They were now legally irrelevant. Delia was methodical. She presented Exhibit A, the financial records, 8 years of my life, distilled into pie charts and balance sheets, proof that I had paid, on average, 72% of my family's core expenses. Condition 1. Fulfilled. She presented Exhibit B, the witness. Aunt Jo took the stand and calmly, heartbreakingly, recounted the entire Thanksgiving dinner, the vote, the applause. Condition 2. Fulfilled. The judge, a woman in her 60s with eyes that matched my grandmother's, read Nora's letter in silence. She read the codicil. She looked at my parents' lawyer. Do you dispute any of this? The man, who was being paid by Mason, just shook his head. No, Your Honor. We were unaware of this directive. The ruling took 5 minutes. The purported sale to Boulder Peaks Development was ruled void. Stewardship and full legal control of the Nora's Meadow Trust was transferred to Erica Chapman, effective immediately, for a term of 3 years. When I walked out of the courthouse, the air felt different. I drove, not home, but to the meadow. I stood on the hill, overlooking the 300 acres of pine and aspen, my land. It was not a victory. A victory is loud, and you celebrate it. This was quiet. This was justice. It was the click of a lock finally snapping into place. It was the sound of a ledger, kept in the dark for 15 years, finally being balanced. That night, I issued a single press release from Argent Bridge Analytics, not as a victim, not as a hero, as a steward. It announced the formation of the Nora Preserve. It stated that my firm would be managing the land's transition into a sustainable, low-impact community trust. It ended with one line. In accordance with Nora Chapman's legacy, 25% of all gross profits generated from the preserve will be placed in a transparent, publicly audited community fund dedicated to supporting local environmental and senior care initiatives. I was not just saving the land, I was continuing my grandmother's work. I was taking the truth, and I was putting it on the balance sheet for the whole world to see. The ruling from the probate court was not an explosion. It was the silent, hydraulic press of the law, applying invisible, irresistible force. The voiding of the sale to Mason's Shell Company and the transfer of stewardship to me didn't just ruin his deal. It exposed him and Everett Cole to massive liability from their investors. The $50,000 fraudulent sale was now the least of their problems. They had lost the war of law, finance, and public opinion. All they had left was brute force. The retaliation began the first night. I was at my condo, not the meadow. The condo was my fortress, my clean room, my zone of control. I was analyzing the topographical maps of the preserve, planning fire breaks, when the sound of shattering glass exploded through my living room. It was the sound of my childhood, the sound of chaos, of things breaking, of control being lost. I didn't duck. I didn't scream. I simply stood up, my heart a cold, hard knot in my chest, a rock, the size of a fist, sat on my white wool rug, surrounded by a spiderweb of glass from the floor-to-ceiling window. I walked over, wrapped around the rock, held by a rubber band, was a single piece of lined paper, torn from a child's notebook. You will regret this." The handwriting was a furious, looping scrawl, Lila's. It was so juvenile, so pathetic, that I almost laughed. This was their countermove? After I had dismantled their multi-million-dollar conspiracy with a probate codicil, they threw a rock. I calmly went to the kitchen, pulled on a pair of rubber gloves, and retrieved the note. I placed it, and the rock, in a large freezer bag. Then, I went to my security terminal. The public win at the charity had prompted me to upgrade my building's security. The cameras I had installed were high definition, with night vision. I rewound the footage. There it was, 2 a.m. A car slowed at the end of my street. It was a dark, cheap sedan. The window rolled down. An arm emerged. The throw was clumsy, weak. It missed the window twice before finally connecting. The car sped off, but it paused under a streetlight just long enough for the camera to catch the model. A beat-up, dark blue Honda Civic. The license plate was blurry, intentionally mud-caked, but I didn't need the plate. I recognized the bumper sticker. A local snowboard brand. It was the same car I'd seen one of Mason's construction foremen driving. A man named Kyle, who Mason often used for off-the-books errands. I saved the footage. I called the police. They arrived in 20 minutes. They were respectful, serious. I was no longer a potential suspect in an elder abuse case. I was Erica Chapman, the woman who had cleaned up the reforestation fund. I was a credible victim. They took the rock. They took my statement. They filed the report. Vandalism. Possible intimidation of a witness, the officer said. The moment they left, I called my security contractor. "I need the window replaced by morning," I said. "And I want the system expanded. Motion detectors on the perimeter, laminated glass on all windows, everything." I did not sleep. I sat in my office, watching the blue-black footage of the empty street, and I worked. The next escalation came 3 days later. They were getting clumsy, and they were getting desperate. I was on a video call with Delia Hart, discussing the civil suit. When my building's intercom buzzed, I saw the video feed. It was Lila. Beside her stood a burly man in a blue jumpsuit, holding a metal toolbox, a locksmith. I unmuted my mic. "Yes?" Lila's voice was bright, sharp, and utterly insane. "Erica? Oh, good. You're home. Can you buzz us up? I seem to have forgotten my key." I looked at Delia on my screen. Delia raised one perfect eyebrow. I looked back at the camera. "You don't have a key. Lila, you don't live here." "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "Buzz me in, or I'll have him drill the lock." The locksmith shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am," he said, "I can't drill a lock unless you prove residency." "Oh, for God's sake." Lila's voice was muffled as she turned to him. "I am the resident. This is a family matter. My sister is unwell. She's locked me out. Here." I watched on the camera as she unfolded a piece of paper from her purse. I zoomed in. It was a deed of transfer, a document that looked like it had been printed from a free legal forms website. The signatures were obviously forged. The notary stamp a black, illegible smudge. "This is a fraudulent conveyance," I said, my voice echoing down to the street. "Sir," I said to the locksmith, "my name is Erica Chapman. I am the sole owner of this property. This woman is attempting to gain illegal entry. I am currently filming this interaction, and I am calling the police." I pressed the mute button on the intercom and dialed 911. "Yes," I said calmly. "I am at 1445 Canyon Boulevard. I have a woman on my doorstep, identified as Lila Chapman, who is attempting to gain forced entry with a fraudulent deed of transfer. She is with a locksmith. Yes, I am safe. I am in the apartment. Please send an officer." Delia was watching me, a look of profound, almost amused admiration on her face. "Keep your camera on her," she advised. I turned the intercom's audio back on, just in time to hear Lila shrieking at the locksmith, who was packing his tools. "You can't just leave. I'm paying you." "I'm not getting involved in this, lady," he said, backing away. "She's calling the cops." "She's bluffing," Lila screamed. She began to bang on the glass door of the lobby with both fists. "Erica, you let me in! You bitch! You let me in!" I just watched, silent, my phone camera recording the feed from the intercom. I filmed her rage, her desperation, her unraveling. This was the real Lila, the one beneath the cashmere sweaters and the victim's tears. This was the toddler in a 30-year-old's body, denied what she wanted. The police cruiser pulled up 2 minutes later, the same officers from the rock incident. They didn't approach Lila with questions. They approached her with authority. "Ma'am, step away from the door." I watched as Lila tried to use her tears, her unwell sister story. I watched as the officer calmly took the fake deed, looked at it for half a second, and handed it back. "This is not a valid legal document, ma'am. You need to leave the premises, now, or you will be arrested for trespassing." Lila's face, when she looked up at my window, was not sad. It was not angry. It was pure, unadulterated hate. She screamed one last incoherent word at me and stalked off down the street. The officers tipped their hats to my camera, and I buzzed them in to take my formal statement. The incident was added to the growing police file. Attempted breaking and entering, uttering a forged document. This was not a strategy. This was a tantrum, a dangerous, illegal tantrum. The fire started 4 days after that. They had moved from intimidation to fraud, and had now landed on arson. It was late. I was woken by the building's alarm system. A piercing, electronic shriek. I smelled it before I saw it. The acrid chemical stench of gasoline and burning plastic. I grabbed my laptop, the red file, and my purse. I went to the hallway, which was already hazy. People were yelling, running down the stairs. I followed. In the alleyway behind my building, the entire row of industrial trash bins was an inferno. Flames were licking up the brickwork, blackening the wall just below my office window. Firefighters were already dousing it, the hiss of water fighting the roar of the blaze. A police detective, not a patrolman, found me in the crowd. "Ms. Chapman?" "Yes." "We found this," he said, holding up a melted red gasoline can. "It was tossed behind your bins. It looks like they were aiming for the gas main on the building wall. They were trying to burn me out, or more likely, they were trying to create a diversion, a fire that would destroy the building's utility boxes, cut my power, my alarms, my cameras. It was sloppy, it was reckless, it was stupid, but it was also deadly serious. The police found the chemical traces of accelerant all over the pavement. This was no longer vandalism. This was aggravated arson. I spent the rest of the night in a hotel, while the fire marshal and a forensic team swept the building. The next morning, I sat in Delia Hart's office. Her face was granite. "This is done," she said. She was no longer a lawyer. She was a prosecutor. "They've escalated from petty vandalism to a Class B felony. They are going to hurt someone, Erica, or they are going to hurt you." She picked up the phone. "I am filing for an emergency protective order against both Lila Chapman and Mason Ward. Effective immediately. They are not to come within 500 yards of you, your home, or your place of business. I am also filing the civil harassment suit. We are petitioning the court for damages, legal fees, and punitive action." "They won't obey it," I said. "It's just paper." "It's not just paper," Delia countered, her voice sharp. "It's a tripwire. The next time Lila bangs on your door, the next time Kyle the foreman drives down your street, they are arrested. No warning, no second chance. The cuffs go on." The news of the fire, clearly identified as arson and linked to the ongoing Chapman dispute, was the final straw for my neighbors. My building's HOA held an emergency meeting. They voted unanimously to install a new 24-hour security patrol. The neighbors in the houses across the street, the same ones who had once viewed me with suspicion, installed floodlights on their properties, aimed at the alley behind my building. The community that my family had tried to turn against me was now, literally, protecting me from my family. I sat in my office, the window now boarded up with plywood, the smell of smoke still lingering in the air. I looked at the timeline. The rock, the locksmith, the fire. I was an auditor. I analyzed patterns. This was not the pattern of a criminal mastermind like Everett Cole. This was the pattern of a cornered animal. It was panicked, sloppy, and increasingly violent. They were desperate. They had lost their money. They had lost their dream. They had lost their social standing. And now, thanks to Delia's protective order, they were about to lose their freedom of movement. They were completely exposed. Their desperation was my tactical advantage. I realized this was not a siege I had to endure. This was a collapse I could accelerate. They were flailing, trying to provoke me into a rash move, into a mistake. They wanted me to be hysterical. I would not be. I would be methodical. I pulled out a fresh legal pad. They had one last point of leverage. My mother and father. They were still using them, hiding behind them, manipulating them. It was time to make the final move. It was time to separate the assets from the liabilities. The final desperate escalation of the fire was what broke the silence. It was what finally broke my mother. The call didn't come from my father or Lila. It came from Aunt Jo. Her voice was thin and trembling. "Erica, you need to come. It's your mother. She collapsed. They're at St. Mary's." I hung up. I didn't feel fear or panic. I just felt a cold, gray finality. This was the collateral damage. This was the true cost of their war. And the bill had just been delivered to the one person who hadn't started it. The hospital was a stark, sterile white, smelling of antiseptic and burnt coffee. The emergency room waiting area was a purgatory of quiet, fluorescent-lit misery. I found them in a small, private waiting room reserved for critical patients. My father, Lila, and Mason. The restraining order was not on my mind. Seeing them there, huddled together, it was clear the order was just paper. They were a single, toxic entity. My father was pacing, his face the color of wet cement. Lila was sitting, her knees drawn up, her face buried in her hands. Mason stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. But his eyes were scanning the hallway, like a cornered animal looking for an exit. When he saw me, his expression wasn't hatred, it was fear. I was the one who held the evidence. I was the one who had just survived an arson attempt. Lila looked up. Her face was swollen, her eyes red. The moment she saw me, her grief curdled into pure reptilian spite. "You," she hissed, her voice a low, gravelly whisper. "You did this. This is your fault. You and your files." I didn't answer her. I didn't even look at her. I walked past them and stopped in front of my father. What happened? My father wouldn't meet my eyes. He just kept pacing, his hands twisting together. "The police," he mumbled. "They came to the house about the fire. They had questions. For Mason, for Lila, your mother. She just went white. She said, 'No more, Richard, no more,' and she fell." "What happened?" I asked again, my voice quieter, harder. "It was her heart," he said, his voice breaking. "Stress. They said it was a stress-induced, something, tachycardia. They're trying to stabilize her." A doctor came out, his face neutral, tired. "Family of Eleanor Chapman?" We all surged forward. "I'm her daughter," I said, stepping in front of Lila. "Your mother is stable," he said. "She had a severe panic attack that mimicked a cardiac event. Her blood pressure is dangerously high, and we're keeping her overnight for observation. But she is conscious. She's asking for Erica." The look on Lila's face, it was a grotesque mask of shock and betrayal. Even now, on a hospital gurney, my mother was choosing me. "She can have one visitor, 5 minutes," the doctor said. "I'll go," I said. "No!" Lila shrieked, lunging forward. "You don't get to! You're the one who put her here!" Mason pulled her back, his hand clamping on her arm. "Lila, shut up. Not here." I just looked at the doctor. "I'll be right there." I turned to go, but my father's voice stopped me. "Erica, wait." I turned back. He was standing still. Finally, He looked ancient, a hollowed-out version of the vibrant, visionary man I had once, long ago, adored. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice so low I had to lean in. Lila and Mason were watching, their faces tight with suspicion. What is it, Dad? It wasn't just the POA, he whispered, the words tearing out of him. It wasn't just the meadow. It was years ago, after your friend, the one who betrayed you. You had perfect credit. Lila. Lila was in trouble. Again. A car. Some other things. It was just supposed to be temporary. A quick fix. I didn't need him to say it. I knew. I had seen the phantom account on my credit report years ago. A single credit card with a $5,000 limit that I had assumed was a clerical error. I had disputed it, and it had vanished. You let her, I said. It wasn't a question. You let Lila open a credit card in my name. I co-signed it, he stammered, as if that made it better. I told her we would pay it off. I never told your mother. I never told you. I was trying to protect everyone. Protect everyone, I repeated. The words were ashes in my mouth. I looked at this man. My father. The man who had let his youngest daughter commit identity theft against his eldest. The man who had sat silent while I was voted out of the family. The man who had let me pay his mortgage for 8 years. I had been waiting for this my entire life, for the confession, for the apology. I had imagined this moment would be a firestorm of rage, of screaming, of 15 years of I told you so. But I felt nothing. No anger, no betrayal, just a profound, crushing exhaustion. It wasn't a revelation. It was just a final, missing piece of data in a spreadsheet I had closed long ago. I have to go see Mom, I said, and walked away. The ICU was quiet, just the rhythmic, electronic sigh of the monitors. My mother looked impossibly small against the white pillows, her skin pale and translucent. A web of wires connected her to the machines beside the bed. Her eyes were closed. I pulled a chair to the bedside. I didn't touch her. I just sat. I knew you'd come, she whispered, her eyes fluttering open. I'm here, Mom. He's a fool, your father, she said, her voice a dry rasp. A weak, wonderful fool, but he's weak. I just nodded. Lila, she's a storm. She's all impulse. She's all want. I know, Mom. She turned her head on the pillow, her gaze locking on mine. Her eyes were clear, sharp, and for the first time in my life, completely free of fear. I need you to know, she said, her voice gaining a strange, thin strength. The recording, the one you played at Thanksgiving. I froze. I knew what he was. Erica, she whispered. Mason, I knew it the first night he came to the house. He has dead eyes, like a shark, but I was trapped. Your father. He needed this deal. Lila needed this man. I was trapped. Mom, you don't have to. Let me finish. She took a rattling breath. When he came to me with that script to read for the bank, I knew it was a lie. I knew he was recording me. He had his phone on the table. He said it was for his notes. He was a bad liar. I saw the red light. My heart stopped. And I thought of you, Erica, she said, a tear escaping the corner of her eye, tracing a path into her hairline. I thought of my girl, my ledger, my girl who keeps all the receipts, and I knew I was too weak to fight him, but you weren't. I couldn't speak. My entire understanding of that event, of her, was shattering and rearranging itself. So I read it, she whispered, her voice full of a terrible, secret pride. I read the script. I even pretended to cry. I made sure he had it. I made sure he had his proof, because I knew that if he had a recording, you would find it. I knew you would get it. I gave you the evidence. Erica, it was the only way I knew how. I gave you the gun. She had not been a victim. She had not been coerced. She had been a saboteur. She had seen the battlefield, known she couldn't win, and passed the weapon to her only soldier, in the only way she could. I reached out and took her hand. It was cold, frail. I didn't say, "Thank you." I didn't say, "I love you." The words were too small. I just squeezed her hand, my fingers wrapping around hers, and I held on. We just stayed there, in the quiet beeping of the ICU, two women who finally, after 34 years, understood each other completely. I left after 10 minutes. I walked back out into the waiting room. Lila was gone. Mason was gone. Only my father remained, slumped in a chair, his head in his hands. He looked up as I approached, his face a ruin of desperation. "Is she—" "She's fine," I said. "She's sleeping. She's strong." I walked out of the waiting room, out of the hospital, into the cold, clean night air. I felt changed. The emptiness was gone. The anger was gone. My grandmother's codicil, my mother's confession. They were not weapons. They were shields. They were validations. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a text message from Lila. It wasn't words, it was an image. A single white plastic stick, held in her trembling hand. On the small screen, two bright, unarguable blue lines. A positive pregnancy test. I stopped walking. I stood under a streetlight in the hospital parking lot. This was it, the final card, the one she had been holding back. After the fraud, the arson, the fake deed, the hostage. She was cornered, and she was playing her last, most powerful card, a baby, a family baby, a grandchild, a way to force a truce, to force forgiveness, to get back to the money. You can't prosecute a pregnant woman. You can't destroy the father of your sister's child. I looked at the image, at this final, desperate move. I thought of my mother's confession. I thought of my grandmother's letter, for the one who carries most. I dialed Delia Hart. She picked up on the first ring. "Erica, what happened? I heard about your mother." "She's fine," I said, my voice clear and cold, all the hospital's emotion baked out of it, leaving just pure, hard steel. "But I have a new directive. Lila is pregnant." There was a long, heavy silence on Delia's end. "Well," she said finally, "that is a complication." "No," I said. "It's not. It's just a new asset that needs to be protected. Here is what we are going to do. I want you to immediately draft a new trust. We'll call it the Newborn Protection Fund." What?" "A trust. Delia. It's for the child. Not for Lila. Not for Mason. For the child. I will personally seed it with a portion of the funds we recover from the civil suit. But the terms are to be ironclad. The money can only be used for verified pediatric medical care and, later, for higher education. The trustees will be you and the probate judge. Lila and Mason are never to have signature authority. They cannot touch a single dollar. It is to be the child's, and the child's alone." Delia was quiet for a moment. "You are a cold, brilliant, and terrifying woman. Erica Chapman." "I'm just an accountant, Delia. I'm protecting the asset from the liabilities. Now for the final offer. I'm done." "Done?" "This ends, now. You are to contact their lawyer in the morning. The criminal complaints for the arson, the forgery, and the fraud are all on your desk, ready to be filed. My mother's collapse is now a new variable. The DA will not look kindly on that." "What's the offer?" "It's simple," I said, looking up at the blank, concrete wall of the hospital. "A and B. Option A. They sign a full, public apology. It will be published in the Daily Camera. It will detail the smear campaign, the forged POA, and the theft from the charity. They will agree to a judgment for full restitution of all stolen funds, including all of my legal fees. They will agree to a permanent 5-mile restraining order. If they sign, I will agree not to pursue the criminal charges." "And option B?" Delia asked. "Option B is that I do nothing, and you file? You file everything. The arson, the fraud, the conspiracy, and they go to trial, a criminal trial." A public apology and restitution. Or prison, Delia clarified. And the trust fund for the baby? The trust gets funded either way, I said. The baby is not a bargaining chip. It's the only innocent in this entire mess. Tell them the offer. They have until 5 p.m., Friday. No extensions, no negotiations. I hung up. I knew what they would choose. They were narcissists. Prison was a real physical threat, but a public apology, for them, that was annihilation. It was the death of the ego. I stood there, in the dark, and for the first time, I understood. People don't change because they see the light. They change because they feel the heat. I had just set the deadline. The fire was at their backs. The choice was theirs. The deadline Delia had set was 5 p.m. Friday. By Thursday afternoon, there was only silence from their side, a deep, suffocating, strategic silence. They hadn't responded to Delia's offer. They hadn't tried to negotiate. They were letting the clock run, and it was making me uneasy. A cornered animal is predictable. A cornered narcissist is not. They would never, ever accept option A. A public apology was death to them, which meant they were desperately trying to find an option C. It came at 10 p.m. on Thursday night, just as I was logging off my terminal. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Lila. Erica, please, I know you hate me. I deserve it. But I can't do this. I can't sign this. I can't go to jail. Not now. Please, meet me at Grandma's cottage. Tomorrow morning. Sunrise. Just us. No lawyers. No recorders. I need to talk to my sister. Please, Ari, I'm begging you. I stared at the message. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. It hit every single note of our shared history. Ari. The childhood name no one had used in a decade. Grandma's cottage. The one sacred place. Just us. No lawyers. No recorders. The explicit demand that I come defenseless. This was their option C, a trap. It was sloppy, desperate. They were still under a restraining order. This text message, this request for a meeting, was a violation in itself. They were trying to get me alone, on their turf, the turf they no longer owned. I thought of Mason. I thought of Everett Cole, the puppet master, still hiding in the shadows. This was a trap to get me alone, to threaten me, to intimidate me into dropping the charges, maybe worse. I typed back a single word, sunrise. Then I called Delia. The lure is in the water, I said. Sunrise, the cottage, just us. Delia was silent for a beat. Erica, absolutely not. That is a violation of the protective order. It's a setup. I know it's a setup, Delia, I said, pulling on my jacket. That's why I'm going. This ends tomorrow. I want this on our terms, in a controlled environment. There is nothing controlled about a secluded cottage with a man who just tried to burn down your building. There will be, I said. I need you. I need Aunt Jo. And I need Detective Miller. This isn't a meeting. It's a sting. They are actively intimidating a witness. They are violating a court order. I want them there. I want them hidden. I want them listening. There was a new sound in Delia's voice, a low, appreciative hum. They are handing us the knife in their own neck. I'll make the call. Miller owes me a favor. He'll provide 2 plainclothes officers. They'll be in the trees. Mike's hot. Aunt Jo and I will be at the head of the dirt road, in my car. You will be wired. No, I said. They'll look for a wire. This has to be clean. I'll have my phone. You'll have your team. I'll bring the agreement. If Mason shows, if he makes one threat, they move in. I want him arrested for this, for violating the order, for intimidation. I want it separate from the arson and the fraud. I want a fresh charge, a clean one, a simple one. Understood, Delia said. Aunt Jo and I will be in place by 6 a.m. The officers will be there at 5:30. What's the signal? I looked at my desk, at my cold, empty coffee cup. If I text you the word coffee, it's a go. It means he's there. He's threatened me, and they move in. Tell them to wait for the text. Godspeed, Erica, she said. Close the book. The drive to the meadow at dawn was surreal. The sky was a bruised, cold purple. A thick frost covered the fields, crunching under my tires as I pulled down the old dirt road. I passed Delia's dark sedan, parked in a cluster of pines, invisible from the cottage. I felt no fear. I was an auditor, arriving on site to finalize a report. The numbers were all in. This was just the final signature. I saw her through the small cottage window, a shadow, already inside. I walked in. The air was cold, smelling of old wood, dust, and something else. Fear. Lila was sitting at the small, rough-hewn table my grandmother used to roll out dough on. She looked shattered. She was pale, her hair unwashed, her eyes red and swollen in the gray morning light. She was wearing one of Dad's old, oversized sweatshirts. She looked, finally, her age. She looked like a terrified, pregnant 30-year-old. "You came," she whispered. I didn't sit. I stood opposite her, and I placed a single, thin file on the table between us. It wasn't the red file of evidence. It was a new one, bound in simple, neutral blue. On the cover, I had typed 2 words: "The path to reconciliation." "This is the agreement," I said. "Option A. The deadline is 5 p.m. today." She flinched. I can't. Erica, a public apology? It will destroy Dad. It will destroy me. Mason isn't here, Lila, I said, my voice quiet. You asked for just us. This choice is yours. Read it. She pulled the papers toward her. Her hands were shaking violently. She read the terms, the full restitution, the permanent restraining order, and the public apology, the one Delia had drafted, detailing the lies, the smear, the forgeries. She looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw no artifice, no performance. The manipulative, calculating, reptilian part of her was gone. All that was left was the raw, terrified core. "I didn't know about the fire," she whispered, a tear rolling down her pale cheek. "Ari, I swear to you, I knew he was angry. I knew he'd been talking to Everett Cole. He was pushing him, telling him to handle you, to shut you up. But fire? I didn't know." "It doesn't matter," I said. "You were part of the conspiracy. You're liable." "I know," she cried, her voice cracking. "I know. I'm so scared. I'm pregnant. I don't want my baby to be born with me, in jail." She was sobbing now, real, gulping, agonizing sobs. She wasn't faking. This was real. This was the bottom. She picked up the pen I had placed on the file. I'll sign it. I don't care about the apology. Just, will you keep him away from me? Mason, I'm afraid of him now. He's not the man I thought." Before I could answer, the back door of the cottage flew open, slamming against the log wall with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. Mason stood there. He was a horror show. His eyes were bloodshot, his face purple with a congested rage. He was unshaven, and he smelled of sweat and alcohol. "What the hell are you doing?" he roared. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Lila. He saw the pen in her hand. "You're signing? You're giving up? After everything?" "Mason!" Lila shrieked, scrambling back, her chair falling over. "It's over. They know everything. It's this, or we go to prison." "Prison?" he spat. "There is no prison. She's bluffing. She's got nothing." He lunged forward, not at me, but at the file. He ripped the papers from the table, crushing them in his fist. This is what you're afraid of? Paper? She has no proof. It's all just talk. Her word against ours." He turned on me, his eyes pinwheeling with a terrifying, unhinged energy. He took 2 steps toward me, backing me against the cold stone fireplace. He was well inside the 500-yard boundary of the restraining order. "You," he hissed, jabbing the crumpled papers at my face. You think you're so smart. You think you've won. You destroyed my life. You destroyed everything." I didn't move. I didn't flinch. My heart was a cold, steady drum. I just looked him in the eye. He was a pathetic, violent child. He raised his hand, the one holding the papers. "You will regret this." I calmly slid my hand into my coat pocket. My fingers found my phone. I unlocked it. I typed the 5 letters. O-F-F-E-E. I hit send. "I don't think she will, Miss Ward." The voice came from the front door. Mason froze. He spun around. 2 men were standing in the doorway. They were dressed in jeans and flannel shirts. They looked like hikers. Detective Miller and his partner. "Who the hell are you?" Mason stammered, his bravado instantly evaporating, leaving just the weak, terrified fraud beneath. "Get out of here! This is private property!" "We're the police, Mason," Miller said, his voice bored. He stepped into the room. "And this isn't your property. You're in clear violation of a court-issued protective order. You are also currently in the act of threatening a witness. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back." It happened fast. Mason looked at the back door, but the second officer was already there. He was trapped. He tried to shove Miller. It was a fatal mistake. In seconds, they had him on the floor, his face pressed into the dusty pine boards my grandmother had once swept clean. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoed in the small room. "Mason Ward," Miller said, hauling him to his feet. "You're under arrest for violation of a protective order, intimidation of a witness, and we have an outstanding warrant for your arrest related to the ongoing investigations into aggravated arson and financial fraud." "You can't do this," Mason screamed, his voice high and thin. "Lila, tell them she's lying. Everett, call Everett Cole. Call my lawyer." They dragged him out of the cottage. His voice faded as they put him in the unmarked car. Still screaming, still blaming everyone but himself. The cottage was silent, but for the sound of Lila, weeping. She was in a heap on the floor, by her overturned chair. Aunt Jo and Delia Hart walked in. Delia looked at the scene. Lila on the floor, the papers scattered, me standing by the fireplace, and nodded once, as if to say, "Good." She walked to the table, opened her briefcase, and pulled out a fresh, identical copy of the agreement. She placed it on the table. "He can't hurt you anymore, Lila," Delia said, her voice not unkind. "But the deadline stands, 5 p.m. I walked over and picked up the pen from the floor. I placed it next to the file. Lila, her body shaking, pulled herself up and into the chair. She looked at the papers. She looked at me. Her eyes dead. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook so badly that the signature was a jagged, illegible crawl. A single tear fell from her eye onto the paper, blurring the ink. She pushed it back toward me. "It's done," she whispered. The fund, for the baby, is it real?" "It's real," I said. "The papers are already filed with the court." She nodded, wiping her nose on the sleeve of her father's sweatshirt. "The land," she whispered, looking out the window. "The meadow, Mason, he wanted it so badly. He said it was worth $50 million. He said we'd be set for life." I looked out the window with her. The sun was fully up now, and the frost on the meadow was beginning to melt, catching the light like a field of scattered diamonds. "He was wrong," I said. "He was always going to lose. It was never his to take." Lila looked at me, her expression confused. What do you mean?" I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "I signed the final transfer papers 2 days ago. Lila, while you and Mason were plotting this meeting, I was with the state attorney and the Boulder Community Foundation." I gestured to the land outside. "This, Nora's Meadow, it's not a private trust anymore. It doesn't belong to me. It doesn't belong to the family. I signed it over. It's the Nora Preserve, a public park and conservation trust, permanently." The color drained from her face. The full, final weight of it all landed on her. The land, the money, the entire dream. It was never on the table. It had never been mine to keep. It had only been mine to protect. It was never about the money for me. Lila, I said, picking up the signed agreement. It was about the legacy, and I was not going to let a man like Mason Ward, or Everett Cole, or even this family pave it over. It's safe now. It's safe from all of us. I left her there, at the table, with her guilt and her consequences. I walked out of the cottage and into the bright, cold morning. A hard winter wind was blowing down from the mountains. It swept across the meadow, clean and sharp, carrying away the last tattered ashes of their greed. The arrest at the cottage was the end of the war. What followed was the accounting. Mason Ward's trial, or rather his sentencing, was not the dramatic courtroom showdown he probably imagined. Everett Cole, seeing the mountain of evidence and the arrest for aggravated arson, vanished. His lawyers wired Delia a settlement for his role in the conspiracy within 48 hours. Terrified of being pulled into a federal case, Everett cut his losses. Mason, however, was left to face the consequences alone. It wasn't a trial. It was a presentation. Delia Hart didn't act like a lawyer. She acted like an auditor presenting her findings. The red file was entered into evidence, piece by piece, the forged power of attorney, the bank statements from the Reforestation Fund, the invoice from Pixel Flow Media, paying for my own smear campaign with charity money, the emails from Mason to Everett Cole. Execute, the audio recording of my mother, the one she had given me, the video footage of the blue Honda Civic, the testimony of the locksmith, the melted gasoline can from the arson, and finally, the testimony of 2 plainclothes police officers who watched him violate a protective order and threaten me. It was not a case. It was a mathematical proof. Mason didn't stand a chance. He was found guilty on multiple counts of wire fraud, aggravated arson, and witness intimidation. The judge, the same probate judge who had read my grandmother's will, was merciless. She sentenced him to the maximum state guidelines, with a referral to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the federal charges related to the multi-million-dollar investment fraud. He was ruined. Lila was different. She had taken option A. She had signed the confession. Her pregnancy was a significant mitigating factor. She stood before the judge, a pale, hollowed-out version of her former self. She was given 5 years of probation, contingent on her completing 1,000 hours of community service, full restitution, which Delia would garnish from any future earnings, and mandatory, twice-weekly psychological counseling for the duration of her term. She was, in effect, a ward of the state. She was finally, truly, accountable. The restitution was calculated. Every dollar I had spent on the family home for 8 years, every dollar I had spent on Delia's legal fees, every dollar of damage to my apartment, it was all paid back, with interest. From the assets seized from Mason and the settlement from Everett, my bank account was whole. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a refund. The most important transaction, however, was the one I didn't profit from. The Newborn Protection Fund was officially chartered. Delia Hart was the trustee. The first deposit was the $50,000 I had recovered from the fraudulent sale of the meadow. The money was earmarked specifically for my sister's child, a boy, I heard later, and would be inaccessible to either Mason or Lila. The child, at least, would have a chance. The cycle of greed would not be his inheritance. While the courts handled the human wreckage, I handled the legacy. The Nora Preserve, now owned by the public, became my focus. I used my organizational skills, the ones I had used to build my company, the ones I had used to document my family's decline, to build something new. We cleared the overgrown paths. We established community garden plots where local seniors, the very people Mason had tried to frame me for robbing, could grow their own food. We repaired the old cottage, turning it into a small museum dedicated to my grandmother's history. We held concerts on the meadow, the sound of classical music drifting through the pines where Mason had wanted to pour concrete for a spa. Argent Bridge Analytics funded the NORA program, a support initiative that used the preserve's resources to help people like my mother, trapped in difficult situations, find legal and financial footing. The land had been saved. It was no longer a symbol of greed, it was a source of healing. A year passed, a full, quiet, productive year. I didn't see my family, my father. I heard, had taken a job, a real job, for the first time in decades. My mother was living with Aunt Jo, Lila, her baby, and her probation officer were, as Delia put it, navigating their new reality. Then the invitation came, an email, not from one of them, but from Aunt Jo. Erica, it is Thanksgiving again. Your mother is cooking. Your father will be there. Lila will be there. We would like you to come. This is not a summons. It is an invitation. We want to have a real dinner. There will be no votes. No votes. That was the key. I accepted. I walked into the old house. It smelled of roasting turkey, just like that night. But the air wasn't cold. It was quiet. My father was in his old chair, but he looked smaller. He stood when I entered. Erica, he said, and just nodded. Lila was by the fireplace, holding her son. She looked tired, but the hardness in her eyes, the reptilian spite, was gone. It was just quiet. She didn't apologize. She just said, "Hi, Erica." My mother came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. She looked at me, and she smiled, a real smile. "You came," she said. I brought two things, a loaf of freshly baked sourdough bread, my grandmother's recipe, and a thin, simple file. We ate, we talked, about the weather, about the preserve, about the baby, who had my grandmother's eyes. It was awkward. It was stilted. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. After the pie, before the coffee, I placed the file on the table, right next to the gravy boat, in the exact spot where the red file had been. My father tensed. Lila flinched. "This isn't that," I said. I opened it. It was a single, notarized document, a statement from my firm and Delia's. It showed all the restitution payments had been completed. The civil judgments were satisfied. The debts were cleared. On the cover, I had typed 2 words, paid in full. "This is the final ledger," I said. "The accounts are balanced. As of tonight, it is done." My father looked at the paper for a long time. Then he looked at me. "Thank you," he whispered. I stayed for exactly 3 hours. When the clock on the mantel struck 9 p.m., I stood up. "Thank you for dinner. Mom, it was lovely. Will you come for Christmas?" she asked, her voice hopeful. I looked at her, at my father, at my sister. I smiled, a real smile, not the one from the year before. "I'll check my calendar," I said. It was not a yes, but it was no longer a no. It was a boundary. I drove home to my condo. The new window was perfect. You could barely see the seam. I walked into my office and opened the large fireproof safe behind my desk. The red file was in there, the one that had started it all. I took it out. I didn't need it anymore. I took the new file, paid in full, and I placed it in the safe. Next to it, I placed the small, dried columbine flower and the letter from my grandmother. And beside that, I placed Nora's handwritten recipe for sourdough bread. I closed the heavy steel door. I spun the dial. The tumblers clicked into place. I stood there in the quiet of my office, the city lights twinkling outside my window, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt the book's balance. I felt the deep, profound, and unassailable peace of a closed account. Peace isn't given. It isn't an inheritance. It's built. It's built one piece of evidence at a time, one boundary at a time, and one single, solitary moment when you finally find the courage to say enough. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're all tuning in from. So drop a comment below and let's connect and share your thoughts. Please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story.